Let's move on to our third main topic today. And our third main topic today gets submitted to us by Yuri Greyworm, who writes, "Hey guys, I saw that article you were talking about on Open Mic, talking about Wonder Woman 1984 and the report that came out that Warner Brothers was considering putting it straight to streaming. My question for you guys is, what would be some of the upside of Warner Brothers taking Wonder Woman 84 directly to streaming? I know they said it isn't likely, but what would be the advantages? Thanks." All right, thanks a lot for saying that in, Yuri. And so, yeah, basically what Yuri is talking about here is on the weekend, a story broke on The Wrap that basically said that Wonder Woman 84 is that Warner Brothers was considering taking Wonder Woman 84 directly to streaming instead of its theatrical run. Now, the producer of Wonder Woman 84, Charles Roven, immediately came out and said that's ridiculous. Now this is coming from The Wrap's own report, but Charles Roven, it said this: "Roven also dismissed the idea of a streaming-only release. It's ludicrous if you consider how big the movie is, a movie like this is," he said in an interview. "Everybody recognizes that. As interesting as streaming might be, if you want a huge global worldwide box office, you've got to release it in movie theaters." Now, kind of then compounding that whole thing was the reality of these numbers. And the reality is this. This was also in the same article that The Wrap wrote, and it's this: the most profitable pay-per-view event in U.S. history was the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight in 2015, which grossed $400 million. This is the biggest of all time. From 4.4 million buys, which, by the way, forget the dollar figure, 4.4 million buys is also the biggest buy number of any pay-per-view event in history. More people got this event than any other event in history. Charged at $90 per buy. Even at $90, $4.4 million people got it, and it still only equated, only equated to 400 million. It's hard to imagine moviegoers even paying $30 to $40 for a new release every month, so home video wouldn't even come close to the fight's revenue. So basically, let's say that Wonder Woman 84 was released in theaters, and it broke the most buys record. It broke the record, and say it had 5 million buys. 5 million people bought it at, say, 30 million a pop. 30 million a pop. Great. Well, okay. How many millions does that make? Doesn't equal a billion. Does not equal a billion. It's like, what is it, 150 million? 150 million or something along those lines? $150 million. It doesn't do it. It doesn't do it. And movie fans are not going to pay $60 for a movie. They're not going to pay $70 for a movie. They're not going to pay $90 for a movie. So basically, the producer, Charles Roven, Sony themselves basically walked through that it's not a model that works. It simply is not a model that works as far as we currently understand. Because, Rob, I think Yuri raises an interesting question. Okay, we've talked a lot about why it can't work or wouldn't work or may not work. But what could be theoretically some of the upside of maybe and going to do that? And by the way, since that report in The Wrap came out, Warner Brothers has come out and definitively said that no, Wonder Woman, we are not considering putting Wonder Woman directly to streaming. This is going to be in theaters one way or the other. So there's that. That's something to keep in mind. But it does raise an interesting question. What could the advantages be of a move like that? And Rob, I want to suggest two potential advantages to doing it. Now, again, the advantages I'm going to suggest are still outweighed by all those negatives we already talked about, but here are what I think would be a couple of the advantages. Advantage number one, it does guarantee some sort of revenue for Warner Brothers. Because at this point, we simply do not know when theaters are going to be open again. Maybe they'll be open again in 6 weeks. Maybe they'll be open again in, 10 weeks. Maybe they'll open again in 10 months. The reality is we simply don't know. And in the meantime, Warner Brothers is simply sitting on this incredibly expensive movie that, by the way, they've already put a bunch of advertising dollars into. So I would suggest that one advantage, and I'm acknowledging that it is outweighed by all the negatives, but I'm saying one advantage is it guarantees, at least in the short term, some form of revenue coming in. Even if it's not nearly enough, it's some form of revenue. But the second advantage is the one that I'm more fascinated by. I'm sure we've all heard the analogy and seen the things about first penguin in the water. Now, if you've ever heard that, the basic meaning behind that saying first penguin in the water is, if you ever watch these nature shows, what'll quite happen is when it's time for all the penguins to go out fishing and they got to go hunt and get their food and feed and then come back and feed their babies and all that kind of stuff, what happens is they get to the edge of the water and all of a sudden there's this huge pileup of penguins at the edge of the water and none of them are jumping in the water. Why? Because there is probably a sea lion in the water waiting for them to jump in, and it always takes that first penguin to jump in. And then once the first penguin jump in, then everybody jumps in. The reason I bring up that analogy is, while all the empirical evidence that we have, Rob, currently points to the notion that a VOD release like this would be financial suicide, the reality is we've never really had a case study to study it. We've never really had a definitive case study of it. And while all that evidence does point to, yes, it would be financial suicide, it would be interesting to take a high-profile project like Wonder Woman and be that first penguin in the water. Be that first penguin to dive into the water. Now, will it dive into the water and be devoured by the sea lion of financial suicide? Maybe. Maybe. But we don't know for sure. And it would be interesting to see a big high-profile case like a Wonder Woman take that dive into the water. It would be interesting to see. Most likely it results in its death. But I still think it would be fascinating. So if I had to be hard-pressed, Rob, to come up with maybe a couple of upsides to Wonder Woman maybe doing the VOD release thing, those are a couple of advantages that I could see that would be actually quite interesting to see how it would turn out. Rob, when you think about it, and you see the comments from Warner Brothers, and you see the comments from Charles Roven, who is also a producer, by the way, on the Christopher Nolan Batman films, what can you see as maybe some of the advantages of Wonder Woman actually trying to blaze that trail and trying a VOD release?
I don't know if I see any advantages to it, quite frankly, because, like you said, the first penguin in the water is going to make mistakes, even if there is no sea lion. And there are issues in terms of paying back an investment. And Wonder Woman already, as we've talked about before, movies are made with credit lines and borrowed money. And the studios have to start repaying the money that they've borrowed to make these films. And it's the kind of thing, when they have a movie that they know, they're already doing projections based on the first Wonder Woman. So they already have projections in place that their banks are aware of, their financiers are aware of, that they're expecting to do a certain amount of money in a certain amount of time. And a movie like Wonder Woman 84 is a movie that is also not only going to make money for itself in the studio, but it also has to keep the entire studio moving forward so they can continue to make movies for the next years to come. So that revenue stream, and it's not just what the theatrical box office is, it's what ancillary markets, still there's physical media, still there's cable, international cable sales, all streaming. There's all kinds of engines of money that a movie is. A movie earns out for a number of years, even, not just what it makes the box office. And I don't think that right now, VOD, because people aren't used to doing it. In 5 years, when many penguins have gone into the water, it's just like it's just like streaming. 10 years ago, people were like, what's this newfangled streaming thing? And then a few years later, we're all on Netflix and chilling because people knew what it was. And once people get into that, I mean, if you had a choice, there's going to be a lot of people, I think, once this is something that is part of the norm, there's going to be people, older people maybe, younger people are still going to go to the movies. You and I will still turn up opening night or those Thursday previews and pay our money and see these big spectacle movies on a giant screen with the thunderous sound system. But maybe in the future, the ecosystem will have changed. But right now, man, the penguins don't know if the sea lions are there. And until it's proven that the penguins can all jump in the water, they are not going to take one of their Tiffany jewels or one of their tentpole releases that the studio relies on to keep its doors open for the rest of the year. I mean, Warner Brothers could live off $1 billion hit for a year. I mean, or maybe not quite a year, but they can, and it means a lot. And they can't be like, we're going to allow one of our marquee titles to be the first penguin in the water. They can't do that. They got to start small. And you know what? People are going to look at Trolls Across the World, or whatever the heck it's called. They're going to look at, their World Tour. They're going to look at The Hunt. They're going to look at what's gone on with Invisible Man. I've heard friends of mine have told me, yeah, I got Invisible Man last night and checked it out. So there are people that are availing themselves of this, and it will propagate, and people will figure out how this works and does it work for them, and studios will eventually, I don't know. I mean, like you pointed out, that Pacquiao fight, $400 million at $90 a pop. And those are people that are used to paying for pay-per-view fights. That's something people learn to do over the course of years. So once we're there with movies, I think eventually that might be a viable way to release a large tentpole property, but not right now.
To your point, Hollywood Reporter had talked about with the release of Onward, The Invisible Man, The Hunt, that they don't have specific numbers, but they said I believe the phrase was not impressive.
Right.
Not impressive. Now, but that's a little bit of a different story, though, because, I mean, those are films that, even though they only had a very, very short time in theaters, they did at least debut in theaters. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Trolls World Tour that didn't get into theaters at all.
Also, John, I think most people, that aren't watching the John Campea Show or aren't reading Deadline or Hollywood Reporter every day, most people aren't even aware. We forget that the general population is not following the movie business the way we follow the movie business. So True. When Onward shows up on Disney Plus, or The Invisible Man is suddenly available for download, people are like, how is that any different than what always happens? Because people aren't necessarily aware that those movies are, like, my mom's like, I saw that Invisible Man on pay-per-view. Is that like the Claude Rains movie I saw when I was a little girl? My mom doesn't know, so for her, it would make no difference. So I think only the people that are on the cutting edge of this know, but eventually it will trickle down to the masses and everybody will know, but not right now. It's too new.
By the way, I am now dying to meet your mother to see if she actually sounds like that. I just have this.
Does not.
I have this insatiable curiosity now.
She goes, Bob. She does say that when I'm in trouble. Bob.
All right, guys. Question is for you. We've heard all the reasons against, but if you had to think of some advantages of maybe taking a tentpole film like a Wonder Woman and just saying, you know what, we're just going to dive into that water and put it out in VOD, what would you see as some of the advantages of doing that? Jump down to the comment section below and let us know your thoughts. All right, guys.